Mark Saltzman was gone. A cold day in March was the last anyone had seen of him. I'd come back from the war in April, a man who would soon find out he wasn't the same. Things felt gray, like he left with a part of me that I couldn't understand anymore. Maybe it was the war, maybe it was him, but I couldn't shake the feeling I needed to do something else. I had no wife to come home to, no family, no friends. My best friend Chance hadn't come back from the war. Most nights for a while were spent staring up at the ceiling, lost in the memories. Somehow, I thought getting back home would snap me out of it. Learning of Mr. Saltzman's disappearance only trapped me further in the feeling that the world was changing too fast for me to keep a hold of. Like while we were out there fighting, back home they'd all gotten over us. I decided at some point in that spring that the best I could do was to go out looking for him. I could only take sitting around for so long. I couldn't hide from myself behind a cigarette forever. The first place I visited was a town called Littlebury, Kentucky, the place where young Saltzman had grown up. It was a small town of corn and humble people, likely on the decline as young generations like Saltzman's moved into the cities. I came in on a Greyhound and got dumped at the only stop in town. I made my way up the biggest hill in view to 218 Little Rock Road, his early home. It looked over the prairies to the north. The place smelled just as you'd expect, and I could hear the familiar noises of animals of all sorts in the barn and the field behind the house. A big red oak sat in the front lawn, with a tire swing that looked like it hadn't really been used since Saltzman's days as a young boy. Unfortunately, his parents, John and Isabella Saltzman, were just as shocked to learn of his disappearance as anyone else was. I guess it wouldn't be as easy tracking him down as I thought. The country was quiet. On my way back, I even dared to enjoy the scenery, although it didn't last long. The next few weeks, maybe even months, I had lost count somewhere. All felt the same gray. The sky reminded me of the war, the way it sat still above while the rain fell on us like tears, like somehow it knew everything I'd lost in that place. I'd left Littlebury on the first ride I could find. It had nothing for me. All it did was remind me of everything I wasn't anymore. The city was where I spent most of my time. The dark alleyways and dimly lit streets were the perfect places to forget myself. All along I remained hopeful that somewhere he'd turn up. Maybe I was just lying to myself. I visited all the city's spots, even the ones I'd never want to find him in. But maybe Saltzman had gotten into some bad business at some point. I'd heard before that the high school had run into hard times and made budget cuts. Maybe he'd looked for money elsewhere and gotten himself stuck under. He always talked about remodeling the local theater. We always told him our band wouldn't sound good either way. I took a cab to the Mirror, a club most of the city's scum knew well. He wouldn't be there, but I thought a source of information might. I needed to talk to Miss Jeanette. I woke up most mornings in a cold sweat. Every time I slept, I'd dream of him. I'd watch him walk the halls of the old high school, teach me and my friends how to play a B-flat concert scale. Always said that was his magnum opus. Then all of a sudden the dream would change. I'd be there in the trenches with him right next to me. He'd stand up right in front of me and climb up onto the scorched ground. I always tried to yell, grab his arm, stop him, but I couldn't. I was paralyzed there. Every dream I watched him walk out and through the fog and into nowhere. It was just a dream. I knew it was, but something about it felt so real. Felt like I'd experienced it before. The days kept falling through the cracks, with nothing to show for myself or my search. Soon enough it would be summertime. I tailed Mosey Buggs, an infamous gangster in the city, for a while. Kept a watchful eye on the shady sides of his business and his sidekick, George Keynes, also known as the Knife. Everybody around here knew Buggs had a hand in the black market, but he also had his hands in the police force. No one could touch him. I learned that Mosey knew Saltzman too. They had been teacher and student at one point. Legend had it, Buggs could blow some beautiful melodies on that trombone, but only his closest had ever heard. Buggs never did know what I was after, but at some point he'd caught on to me watching him so closely. I figured it was only a matter of time until he sent one of his men out for me. In all my searching for evidence, I did quite a bit of digging into Saltzman too. I learned through old Littlebury newspaper clippings that he'd been a star track runner and football player back in the day. Last I'd seen him, you'd think he barely cut it as the water boy in high school. Apparently, when Saltzman was 22, he'd signed up for the army. He wanted to go all over the world and help protect his country. Unfortunately, he was rejected after doctors found him to have very little hearing in both of his ears, making him medically tone deaf. After being rejected by the army, Saltzman decided to pursue his second love, teaching, and started working as a band director in Wisconsin. I was puzzled how he'd landed the band job after his diagnosis with the army. Who knew? I left virtually no stone unturned, no lead unpursued, but it all led to nothing. Nobody in the city had any idea where he'd gone. Nobody had any business knowing. Then I found it. An old photograph left in his office. It looked like it had been set there for 50 years, but I figured he'd been teaching for 60. The photo was of a girl, standing, smiling on a beach with a picnic basket and a fishing rod. On the back, someone had written something. "Someday you'll find me here, where the air is warm and the sky is blue, and the sun is always happy to see you. Love, always, Irene." An open envelope lay beneath it, empty now. He'd scribbled out a date. Friday, March 18th, Gate 5, 1:10 p.m. Just late enough for him to finish his class before leaving. It was all ahead of me now. I could go to the airport, look through the records, and finally figure out where he'd gone. I got up to leave, but before I walked out, I paused for a moment. First, I had to make a final stop. I moved to a place called Reedsburg and bought some land in the country. I met a girl named Lusanne and got off to a pretty good life after a few years. The doctors say the baby will be born in June. I feel better now, better about everything. I miss him, but just like everything else in life, people come and go. The best I could do now was remember him. Sometimes I still catch myself wondering, though. In the quiet moments, I find my mind asking how he's doing, or if he ever thinks about any of us. I wonder where he is on that horizon. I never checked the flight records, and I figure I never will. Maybe the destination of Gate 5 at 1:10 p.m. on that cold Friday in March deserves its own story.